right, everybody. I hope y'all having a great day. This is our panel for creators of color. My name is Viktor Kerney, and I will be your host or your, I guess, moderator of this discussion today. We have great people, wonderful people who have been out here doing the work, creating wonderful content, giving us great art. So I'm going to turn it over to y'all to introduce yourselves, and I'll start with Ajuan.
Okay. My name is Ajuan Mance, and by day, I'm an English professor at Mills College in Oakland, and by every other hour of the day, I'm an illustrator, and I also do comics. I have a comic series called Gender Studies, which will be a graphic novel sometime in early 2021, and I also have an online comic strip called Check All That Apply.
All right. Nick, you want to go next?
Of course. I am Nick. I am co-host of the MEGASheen podcast, along with Victor. We are a bi-weekly podcast that discuss gay and geek culture from a Black, queer, and male perspective. We talk about anything from comics to drag queens, to video games, TV shows, films, anything that is under the geek spectrum. By day, I am currently unemployed. And any other time, you can find me hollering on Twitter, hollering at my video games, or just hollering at my cats.
All right, Ed.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? So I'm Ed Williams. I am founder of Mayke Entertainment, M-A-Y-K-E. And Mayke is an entertainment studio developing its own original, super inclusive superhero comic book universe. So we put Black, brown, people of color, women of color, LGBTQIA+, and persons with disabilities at the center of our superhero world. We're super excited.
All right. So like I said, y'all, we have a great panel today. And we're going to really get into just all types of things. So this is going to be fun. So to kick it off, let's talk about what got y'all into this genre. What was exciting about being in the whole comic type, fantasy type of world? What was the thing that brought you into this genre?
Well, I guess I can go. Just the feeling of extraordinary, right? The feeling of leaving reality for however many minutes and being immersed in these different worlds with these different characters and feeling like you are a part of that story, a part of that world. You can go on these adventures that you too, as you're reading or consuming whatever content it is that you're consuming, you feel like you're just there. And that has just been an addiction for me since for as long as I can remember.
I know for me, I always knew at a young age that I was different, and I didn't know that difference was me being gay. So to not be so bogged down into what society, all the crap that society was throwing at me, I immersed myself in video games, I immersed myself in cartoons, and all of that jazz. And it made me feel for a certain point or limited time that I could, save the world, or I could be the hero and all of that jazz. And it was just a security blanket for me, and it still is. And I've always had a yearning to be in this kind of space. So I've always loved it here.
Yeah. I will say that for me, it was an escape. It was an escape away from what I was seeing in real life. I felt like when I was a kid, real life was boring. And so just to see, characters that were traveling different worlds, different places, fighting crime, solving problems were really neat for me. And I found those things to be really exciting, but also really affirming that I could create things like that. I can make my own characters. I can make my own storyline on things that I really liked. So I feel like that when I was reading Wonder Woman as a kid, or even watching Wonder Woman as a kid, or even seeing the cartoons, Super Friends, or reading certain books I was reading back in the day when they had like choose your own adventure books. It was very helpful for me to kind of really open my mind and kind of really engage into how I can maybe create those type of things for me to be excited about. So that was one of the reasons why I got in there as well. Ajuan, what was some things that got you into this genre?
Well, I really had trouble as a young person, as a kid, finding my way into some of the superhero cartoons, but I really loved, you know, like a lot of queer folks of color. When I discovered the Love and Rockets comics, I realized what was possible with the genre. There was magical realism, so it was kind of otherworldly, but there were also queer folks who, some of whom looked like me, and other Afro-Latinos, as well as Mexican-Americans. And I just became incredible.
You're freezing up a little bit, but that's
Oh,
okay.
no.
But we will come back to that particular part. But I will jump to the next question of looking at some of your influences. So what was some of your influences getting into this genre?
Well, for me, I'm a comic superhero. That was like my gateway drug. X-Men, the animated series in the 90s, Batman, Power Rangers, like those were all my gateway drugs. So what really kind of was the major influence for me was Milestone Media. So my cousin and I, we were very, very young, and we were like in our teens, like early teens, 11 or 12. And we went to this flea market with my mother, and we were looking around, and we saw this huge stack, like 2 huge stacks of comics, and we had no idea what they were. We went over there, and there were Black people on the cover, and it was like, oh my God, what is this? We have never seen that before. We were into X-Men, and X-Men had, you know, Storm and Bishop, but it wasn't like all over the place type of Black people. And that's what made superheroes and comics feel like home. Like I loved it, but I didn't always necessarily feel at home. And it wasn't until I got a hold of Milestone that I was just completely just blown away. So Milestone, to this day, and I think for a lot of independent creators and studios, has had such an influence just on me personally. So that's where I draw a lot of my influence. You know, Dennis Cowan, Dwayne McDuffie, all those cats out there. Just that's where the bulk of that comes from me.
Welcome back, Ajuan. I know that you have some technical difficulties. I can't even speak. But right now we're talking about our influences, and we can go back to your original answer. Because I didn't want to make sure everybody hears what you had to say in the beginning.
A lot of the influences I've encountered are people I've met at places like Comic-Con and WonderCon, Alternative Press Expo. You know, real people who are showing that this can be done. Particularly folks who created really unusual stories, but also a lot of Black sci-fi and speculative writers like Octavia Butler, Nnedi Okorafor, Samuel Delaney, especially since a lot of those are queer folks too. That's been really amazing for me. And then, you know, someone like T. Franklin, who creates a Black queer love story. And someone like, you know, the Hernandez brothers, of course, and, you know, folks like John Jennings, who has such an evocative visual style. You know, the audacity of people of color to write themselves into the future and into fantasy worlds is totally inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah, it is when you think about all the things we've seen, you know, throughout the years and what have you. Nick, what were some of your influences?
Definitely the X-Men animated series of the 90s. Also, I would say Jim, cartoon from the 80s. A lot of my influence came from like the old school cartoons, like a Bugs Bunny, Speed Racer, the old school Johnny Quest. I was just a big, well, still am a big nerd, especially when it comes to cartoons and whatnot. And it just always seemed so cool to me that these different worlds were out there that people could live. And it just blossomed from there.
All right, so let's kind of get into some stuff about us in the sense of being people of color in this. Do you feel that the geek world is very affirming to us, or do you feel like there's a lot of hills we still need to climb within this genre?
I was trying to wait for somebody else to go first. I didn't want to keep going first.
I would say there's definitely some strides that have been taken, but overall it's still too far and too few in between the amount of, or the lack thereof, queer representation in comics. Like, you have a lot of the, you have the big two, Marvel and DC, but you also have a lot of these independent comics don't get enough recognition as far as their content that they're putting out. And whenever the big two do make some kind of big announcement, for example, when Iceman was came out, or actually he was outed by Gene, it was this big whole rigmarole, and people, of course, were pissed off that some of their favorite X-Men was all of a sudden now he's queer, and it's not enough. And honestly, if you know me, if you've listened to the podcast, I'm always more the pessimistic side, and I don't think it will ever be enough.
I can speak to that a little bit too. I think that things are a lot different than, say, when I was in college. I was in college in the 1980s, and there was very little for heterosexual, cisgender people of color, let alone queer people of color. And so there's a lot of great indie stuff, but also a lot of that stuff does not include people of color. In terms of, there are biographical comics, autobiographical comics, and, there's more inclusion there, but I feel like there's a ways to go in terms of, for those of us who really want to be able to geek out and maybe cosplay around a character who reflects our identities, there's a real dearth of material. And so, if one of our identities, I know for me, if one of my identities is reflected back, I want to run out there. I've been doing a lot of Zoom calls with the Spider-Man t-shirt on because Miles Morales felt like a connection. But I would love to have a 360-degree kind of intersectional character where there was more than one or two things that we had in common. I feel like a lot, I gotta acknowledge that a lot has improved. Couldn't imagine a Miles Morales 20 years ago or even 5 years ago, but I also, there's a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with the both of you. Honestly, how I feel, when it's not your story to own, you don't care about it as much, right? You lack the proper emotional investment, the buy-in. You're not connecting with it on a level as we would. So these big houses, these big content houses, Marvel, DC, Boom, whatever, they may do it, and it may be okay, it may be good, right? But they have no obligation to it other than pleasing this segment of fans and then squeezing just a little bit more money out of the audience because we did the thing. And that's just one more thing we can check off. There may be some people in the actual companies that actually do care, but at those higher levels, we're not going to get much else. That's why right now we've had 10 years of MCU, right? Out of those 10 years, we've gotten one Black Panther film. And it was phenomenal, but that's not sustainable for an audience that is hungry for way more than just that one film every 2 or 3 years, right? So, yeah, we've made strides. We've checked off a few boxes, but we still have a long way to go. And I think we'll see that in the future once we no longer have to ask or beg for it, and just authentic content and content that's coming as quickly as Netflix or Disney Plus or Hulu, that type of stuff. Like when we get to stop asking for it and stop waiting around for the next thing, you know, in the interim, I think that's when we'll make some really big progress. But you know, I mean, we've made significant strides, but still got a long way to go.
I wanted to touch on what you said about the MCU, how after all of this time, I think it was in the end game where they had acknowledged that there was a queer person in there, and it was only for 5 seconds when they were in some kind of AA meeting or what have you. And I was like, oh, see, we put a queer person in there, so give us our roses. I'm like,
yeah,
are you kidding me? Like, that's what we do. And then you've had, when it comes to Black Panther, there was supposed to be some kind of edited scene that was deleted between the I forgot which one it was. I think it was Florence Kasumba's character and another Dora Milaje. There was actual queer representation there, but they edited it out. But then all of a sudden they still want to get credit for saying that we did it. I'm like, if you did it, then why didn't you put it in the movie? Like, it's one thing to do it. It's a whole nother thing to actually put it in there. And I don't think we're asking for too much for getting more than just 5 seconds on the screen.
Right.
And that's one of the things that pisses me off about some of these big houses, that, oh, we've done it and we did it, but we just left it out. Then why say anything about it?
Right. And that goes back to my first point. If you don't own that story, if you don't have any investment in there, there's no obligation for you to go ahead and put that through. I mean, it's just another check off the box. We did it. Like you said, give us our roses or our golden star, whatever. No, I mean, right. And those stories do definitely warrant more than 5 minutes on the screen too. They are capable of filling out a blockbuster feature film for the summer as well. And it was, what had pissed me off as well with queer representation was Captain Marvel, how obvious the relationship between Carol and Maria was, right? But we never actually said it. It was just always implied, and it was just like, y'all are playing around. Like y'all just playing at this point. Like we get what these auntie-ish vibes are right now. You know, when the auntie brings the good-looking friend all the time to the holiday parties, that type of vibe going on. But it was never said. It was never said, and so it's just like we're tired of everybody kind of pussyfooting around what it is.
Yeah. Why is it still a problem? Why do you think it's still a problem that, you know, and the way things are changing, the way, you know, we at the Gen Z at this point, and Gen Z is accepting everything and everything that's happening. Why are we still, it feels like, why are they still afraid? And again, this is a genre that has talking dragons, talking squirrels, people flying around and whatever, you know, we have all these things. And yet this block is the thing that they're so hesitant on. Why do you think they're still hesitant on this when it feels the public is ready for all of this?
Because the powers that be are cisgender, heterosexual white male that feel that if they go against their perceived dominant or main audience, then they won't have that audience anymore. And it's all about, let's be honest, it's all about money at this point. So if this is my main audience, if I keep them happy and only have this audience that wants queer representation, if I lose that audience, I still have this audience to make money on. So in the process of business, I'm going to keep this audience. But like you said, we've had so many people that say, oh, we're ready for this. And they still, like you said, keep pussyfooting around the idea, and all of these articles saying, oh, there's going to be a queer person in this. Oh, there's going to be this. I'm like, either do it or just shut up about it. Like, stop doing it. Stop doing that. It's just so annoying at this point. And I don't know if it's going to take us doing our own thing as far as a cinematic universe to get it across that we have been ready for this, or it's going to get, it has to be some people in the room that are actually going to have our ideas and our background and also be from our community to actually have these stories told how they should be told and not just some kind of footnote.
I mean, I think that all of that is really compelling. And I think that, we hear the argument made about budget all over and over again, that it's really about cost, and, an international audience. And certainly we heard the international audience would not watch a movie with too many Black people, and that has been disproven. And I think that regardless of the reviews, the biggest selling films for the last several years have been the ones with incredibly diverse casts. People were so surprised at how Suicide Squad became one of the top grossing films of the year internationally and in the US, but it was also incredibly diverse, and a lot of people could see themselves in that. In some ways, I feel like folks are looking for proof of concept, but I also feel like that's a rationalization. I think that any evidence suggests that queer characters and queer storylines are certainly a regular part of really successful television programs on cable and as well as on mainstream television. And so I think in some ways it's about intransigence. It's about the discomfort of companies themselves and the people who run them. And I do wonder, at what point will there be a turning point at which it's undeniable that this is about marginalization? Because I think some of it's about money, but I also think some of it's about what people who have the decision-making power do and don't want to see. And I think that's the thing that concerns me and feels in some ways like it needs the greatest amount of pushback.
So it's interesting when you start to think about it sometimes, like really like why there is so much pushback with this. Now, I'm very curious to hear what y'all think about this whole notion of, well, if you don't see what you see, then you need to make it yourself. Sometimes that's a positive thing, sometimes that's considered negative. And I've heard both sides about like, why do we have to always, it has to be about us making our own thing or whatever, but some people are like, no, we need to make our own thing. How do y'all feel about that particular statement? Do you feel like that is a positive or a negative or a little bit of both? And that question just came from what y'all were saying, so I apologize for springing that question on.
It goes back to what Ajuan was saying. Ownership, right? When you don't own it, you don't have any say in how it goes. I mean, you can still have a seat at the table, but there are still, some other higher powers that be that give the final ruling on what is a thumbs up and what is a thumbs down. So owning it and creating it yourself gives you total power and control on what goes in and what goes out. So I think it can be, it's a double-edged sword. It's good. Like, yes, go and create your own thing, but I also feel like sometimes it's used as an insult. Like, just shut up. And, if you have an issue with it, just shut up and go create your own thing. It can be used in that way as well. But I mean, it could be, I agree with the more positive side of it, but it's not the easiest thing to do. It's a lot. It was a lot for the boys that created Superman, with just that one character. It was a lot for Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. It was a lot for Milestone, just to, get started. It's a lot of work. So it's not always the easiest, but if you have any type of vision or goal to make your own thing, by all means, do that, because it gives you ownership to put out what you want to put into the world. And I'm all for that.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about supporting and I live in Oakland, California, and there's a lot of discussion about supporting Black-owned businesses amidst gentrification as one of the ways kind of stave off gentrification. And I think that when it comes to the intersection of queerness and people of color, queerness and Blackness, you know, I think it's easy to forget that the production of entertainment content is a business also. And boy, what an area where there could be some Black-owned and queer-owned businesses. And you create a structure to tell the stories you want, and there's power in ownership, and there's power in direction. We've seen it happen in the music industry, and things have been produced that might not have if folks hadn't just struck out and said, hey, I have to create my own company to tell the stories I want to tell with these songs. And so I think there is, the means of production being placed in the hands of creators because of what technology now allows us to do on a dime, I think is one of the most empowering developments of the last several years.
It's always funny when people say, go create your own. And then when you do create your own, then they say, well, why are you always segregating yourself from everybody else? I'm like, well, didn't 5 minutes ago you just say, go create your own? So now that just somebody's doing that, now all of a sudden you have an issue with it. Like you said, Ed, it's a double-edged sword as far as the two ideas. You could create your own, but sometimes you don't have the means or you don't have the capital to create your own. So you have to go back to the other side. I think that creating your own is a good idea. However, everybody doesn't have that means to create their own. So they have to actually rely on the other powers that be to tell their stories. Or if they can't, then they have to rely on the people who did create their own to tell those stories how they need to be told.
Yeah, it's expensive. It really is. We've been at this for about 8 years now, and let me tell you something. We have been nickeling and diming any penny we can find between the couch cushions to put towards making all this stuff. We take it, and we'll take any donation you can throw at us. It takes some money to do all this, and we lack capital. We lack, investors. We lack all that stuff. So it's usually just us on our own, and it takes a while, So we don't have the capital. You got to look at all the years that are ahead of you because you lack the coins to move things forward at an expedited speed. But when you do have the capital, that timeline shrinks significantly. But most of us are in a position to where we're having to work a 9 to 5 or several 9 to 5s, and then having to come home and try to find the will and the drive to work on whatever we want to work on. And it's just this up and down. So it's a lot. It definitely is a lot.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that. I know when I was creating StrangeLore, that was just to do the Kickstarter alone was a lot. And you felt that pressure of, will I succeed? Would I get this money? How is it going to work? The whole printing thing, getting the stuff out here. And then you think about the ones who have the access, the people who have the agents or working with the companies. Trying to get an agent now is very interesting because you have people who are looking for queer content, but they may be looking for that cutesy queer content that may be more appealing towards a more white audience versus a more diverse audience. As Nick said, it's a business. So therefore you're dealing with people trying to tell you how your queer content should be and how it should be reflected in these stories. So it's also a little disheartening at times to where you feel like you have to go to a Kickstarter and make your own thing because you control all of that. But at the same time, you wanted to get out to mass audiences. So you feel like you have to go that route. Do you feel like, and I'm asking all y'all, do you feel like the indie route is our best route, or do we still have hope that we can work with the industry of getting our content out there?
That's a
And I guess
hard. Go ahead.
I mean, that is the hardest. I'm not trying to create a production company or anything like that. So, but I think that, I mean, the good thing about the indie route is I think that you'll get more voices, at least coming in on the bottom level, able that I can print my own comics and sell them you can create your own visibility, and there more channels for becoming visible at zine fests and comic fests and these types of things, you know, online, YouTube and Instagram. There are all these ways to gain visibility, but it's true. There's a certain level of reach that if you are working in another, you know, like I'm a professor. I have a full-time job. That you know, using that indie route to get seen is the quickest way to start to amass a broader national and international audience. There are certainly things that those companies can do that it's almost impossible for an individual who's also working a full-time job to do. And so I think indie can be amazing and can get some incredible traction, especially if you can make that conversion to doing it full-time, if you can actually do that. And some people have been able to make that leap. But if you can't, or if it's just too risky, you have a family, you need your health insurance, then, you know, finding a way into more corporate entertainment channels is almost essential.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, like we've been saying, it's hard to do indie. It really is. And you can use Milestone as a template. Like Milestone, they made it, right? But they made it with a deal with DC Comics at the same time. You know, they had mass distribution because of the deal with DC Comics. And they also had like an unprecedented deal with DC to where they still had ownership of everything. But you know, stuff like that is rare. We're dealing with entities that are owned by the larger entities now. You know, Marvel is owned by Disney, DC is owned by Warner Brothers, and it goes on and on and on. So it's almost like if you want to go that route corporately, you have to know people. You have to have a relationship with people. Most of us aren't fortunate enough to know people out there like that. And if you're going to go the opposite route and try to do it all the way indie, you still need somebody like an investor or somebody to come in and financially support this whole thing. It was almost like the same situation with Pixar. Pixar needed Steve Jobs to come in and financially support them through Toy Story. You know, as great as Pixar is, they still needed that financial backing. So I think that's where we're at. You know, you can have a great, solid product, but you still need somebody with one hell of a bank account to carry that thing to the mass market, for sure.
Yeah. I will kind of echo what Juan was saying about, like, it does help when you're out there in the indie circuit, especially you go to the cons and what have you, to kind of get your stuff out there and you talk to the people, because that's who's really, you know, the ones who's going to keep you afloat is the people. So I think it's really good to be a part of these cons and be a part of just the events that really get your stuff out there. It is tough. I will say that it is tough, but it's been affirming, because I think of last year's Comic-Con, it was really affirming just to talk to people who maybe read something I read online or bought the book itself, just to hear what they thought and their opinions. And so that was really helpful. But it is hard when you don't have that money. I'm very fortunate. Like one, I work at a college and I do pretty well enough. I can go to Comic-Con every year and it doesn't hurt me, but not everybody has that ability to go to these cons or to pay the fees to, you know, showcase your books or showcase the work that you're doing. That takes a lot of money as well. So people don't talk about that often, but you have to think about that when you're trying to get yourself out there. But, you know, indie for me seems to be a strong case where I have control over my work and I have control over how I want it out there and distribute it to the public. But I do have a hope that one day there would be more content that features people of color and queer people, to where it's not a gimmick. It's more of, here's an actual story, here's an actual lead character. They're not being there because they need to fill in a quota or a trope. They're actually there for those reasons. One of the questions I kind of want to throw this out there to y'all. With this geek culture that we have, and we're seeing a slow growth of people of color, especially queer people of color in these industries. Do you think that in some ways they feel, how do I ask this question? I thought I had this question in my head, but do you feel like we are at a great place now, or we're still back in step one? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I at least I think I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I so yes and no. If you, I mean, so Twitter is a double-edged sword within itself. Twitter has its good days and Twitter has its bad days, depending on what day it is.
Especially now.
Right.
Twitter's quarantining.
Yeah, it can get kind of pretty terrible. But it just some of the conversations that I've been observing, from Star Wars to the MCU to just anime, manga, all that stuff, we're still having to fight a lot of gatekeepers to a lot of these intellectual properties and a lot of these fandoms, and still have to ask and to apologize and to do things to be accepted in these fandoms. Like, for the longest time, I didn't know Star Wars was for me. I ain't seen nobody black until Mace Windu came around. That's when I fell in love with it. Like that, that was it. And once Mace was done, I was out the game until the recent Mandalorian. That was the most recent Star Wars thing I've watched to date. But there's always this feeling of just wanting to be, to belong. And there's a lot of people that don't want us to be there. That's why cons like BlurCon are so incredible, because you don't have to do it. You don't have to shrink yourself. You don't have to apologize. You don't have to ask permission to join the thing. You can just be a fan of the thing without having to fight your way through it. And I feel like when you go to New York Comic Con, San Diego Comic Con, some of the more white predominant Comic Cons, there's a lot of that still happens. And there's not enough safe spaces for us, again, to be at home with the things that we love and appreciate.
I mean, I think the same is the case. I think the best thing that's happening is us creating our own spaces to geek out and nerd out. Black Girls Create is an amazing platform. And when I came across that platform, I just thought, oh, wow, it meant so much to be able to have this space where I don't have to explain, create, the space where I don't have to explain myself, and even more so, just be surrounded by other folks who are like me. I mean, that was so powerful. Otherwise, I think you're right. The idea of I love this notion of, not really feeling like Star Wars was for you. One of the things I like about Star Trek is there's been a Black woman in Star Trek from the beginning.
Yes.
But, I feel the same way, and I think about what pop culture movements have moved me in the last decade or so. And, when I finally, I'll talk about Spider-Man again, Into the Spider-Verse, because I've pretty much seen all the Spider-Man films. And I watched the show when I was a kid, the cartoon show, the kind of kitschy cartoon show. But it wasn't until, I think, when there's a sequence, particular sequence, leap of faith sequence in the movie. And when I watched that, I felt like, oh yeah, I was moved in a way that I didn't think I would be, because I thought, well, I enjoy the film, but I didn't really care that much about Spider-Man. And now I want to get Miles's outfit and I want to be Spider-Man on Halloween. And I thought, oh, I wish I had known that this place was for me before. Now I'm not a kid, but I can't wait. This is the space that I've been waiting for. And when are we going to have more of those moments when we can lean into and just fully inhabit the space to geek out and magical universes? I'm waiting. I'm ready.
Yes. That was beautiful. Yes. All that.
Exactly. I know for me, I would say we have made strides, but it's still not enough. There's some times where I'll go, well, me and my partner, we'll go to our local cons, and it's obvious that we're a fucking couple. And I don't, if you know me, then I have a short temper when it comes to foolishness and disrespect. So I'm looking just in case somebody wants to pop off, because I'll pop off right with you. And if we have an audience, even more. So I expect to get some kind of disrespect when it comes to these predominantly white cons. Now, when it comes to like a blurred con or whatnot, great, it's for Black folks. But there's always the thinking of, in the back of my mind, well, is it for all Black folks? Because some Black folks are very homophobic, and I don't buy into the notion that I'm rooting for everybody Black, because everybody Black is not rooting for me. And I can't wholeheartedly go into some of these other predominantly Black cons thinking, oh, this is a safe space, because sometimes it's not. And even if like when it comes to FlameCon is great when it comes to LGBTQ representation. However, again, there's always that voice in your head that's saying, well, is it safe for me? Is it safe for a Black gay man? Is it safe for a Hispanic transgender woman? Is it safe for a disabled pansexual? You know, it's always that voice that's saying, this is not a wholehearted safe spot for me.
So I have two, go ahead.
Oh, what he said.
Right.
Yeah, I've always, FlameCon, and I have friends who work FlameCon, who created FlameCon, who's been there. But I always wonder who's in the room when it comes to decision making, who's in the room when it comes to the board of getting those things together. I used to be on the board of BentCon, and that was a queer Comic-Con we used to do here around California, and we did it in Burbank. And being one of out of the board, it was two of us one was the founder, Sean, and the other one was myself, who were of color. We made sure that we made those spaces and made sure those spaces were safe for all people to be there. But how do we secure those spaces? What do we need to do to make sure we are making those spaces and securing those spaces within in that whole realm?
I hate to bring this up since it was the anniversary. However, when it comes to cons like Universal Fan Con, this was supposed to be the intersection of our lifetime. All these different people coming together from different backgrounds, different sexualities, it was supposed to be everything. And I thought what they actually did right was have a lot of different people from a lot of different spectrums come together to actually try to make something work. In the end, it didn't. And you can read about that on articles and whatnot, because we're not going to go through that. But you have to have people in the room that are from different backgrounds than you, because you can't tell their story like they can tell their own story.
Just to piggyback off that, it boils down to intent, right? Intent. If you just want to make a Comic-Con that's for Black people, cool, you did it, right? If you want to go further down a rabbit hole of intention, Black people, intersectionality, brown folks, queer folks, like if you really want to get serious and then being intentional, like Nick just said, about who's in the room putting that together, how you set the culture and the tone of the con, like all those different things. Intention has a lot to do with everything. I don't know if the people at Universal Fan Con set out with the intention to scam everybody. If they did, it was widely successful. Congratulations to everybody. But instead of that
No, you didn't.
But,
Whew.
but again, it all goes down to how you approach. So again, doing a Comic-Con is no inexpensive thing. That takes a lot of money. But I think you can do a lot with the right intention. I for sure feel that way. So why Comic-Con is an example of that. That was the convention that just appeared out of thin air because Universal FanCon fell apart, but it was so masterfully crafted because the intention was to save the weekend for everybody who was going to come. And it was built with love, it was built with care, and it took care of everybody who was supposed to be there for Universal FanCon. Everybody felt that. It was nothing but love in that space from the time it was open to the time it was closed. They took care of everybody. So to me, it just boils down to intention.
And I think creating a space that is affirming and welcoming for the full range of, I guess you'd call them alphabet people, LGBTQIA plus, is complicated. The idea of this, there is a single queer identity that works for everybody. Complexity is messy, and there's, I think space where you can kind of let go when there's a space that's across a multitude of ways of being queer, trans, non-binary, intersex. I think we all, it's a complicated place to inhabit, and what's center and what's margin is a little bit different. But we have to get used to the idea of a queer space in which maybe you're a queer, white, trans guy, you actually have to inhabit your centerness a little bit differently, and conversations have to be had, and that becomes part of the programming of what makes this kind of conference really. I think we all have to go into it with a new expectation that what it means to be part of this community is to ask hard questions and to love our fandoms and our favorite properties, but also to be able to critique them in a different way. So we have to reinvent, I think we have to reinvent fan community. We have to reinvent what it means to be a fan too. I think it's doable. I'm excited to see it happen.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So we're coming down to our final minutes here, but I do want to know, what advice would you give a queer creator of color who really wants to maybe create a game, create a comic, create a fantasy book, or a book series like a Harry Potter? What advice would you give to that creator, especially knowing that there's a lot of roadblocks and walls and foolishness in their way? What would you say to them?
I've created the least stuff the most recently, I think, so I'll jump in with my relatively uninformed opinion. And so I guess I would say, if you build it, they will come. What do you love? You're no matter who you know in your community, and whether you're relatively isolated as a person of color or a queer person or a trans person, there are other folks out there who are going to love what you create. And so make what is motivating to you and put it out in the world in some way, shape, or form. And you will find your audience, and just sit back and see what happens. Let it take you where it takes you. But just make your stuff, and just, make what you want and what's compelling to you. You will find those people who will signal boost you.
Absolutely. Piggyback off that, what we found at Make is you don't have to put whatever it is your difference is on a hook and dangle it in front of everybody, right? You don't have, I'm queer, hey, I'm queer, over here, I'm queer. You don't have to do that. You have to allow your creation, your story, you have to give it the same agency as Captain America, Iron Man, Batman, has with their stories. You know, these are cisgender, heterosexual white men. They don't dangle the fact that they're heterosexual in every single story. It doesn't pop up in every single conversation. They're just living their life. And it's the same with you. You are just you are living your life. Your identity is just one. There's many parts of your identity. Queer is just one of those things. And it doesn't permeate. I mean, it affects how you move throughout the world. And that's something to introduce people to, the nuances of queer perspective through your eyes and through your lens. But you don't have to have anybody in a rainbow cape or anything like that. Like, that's not necessary. all you need to do is introduce somebody to how you see the world, how the world functions around you, and all the supporting characters and environments that make up that world around you. You're inviting somebody to come play in that character's playground, and that's all that's necessary. You know, I mean, you can dial it up and down however you want to go on, you know, how expressive that character is with their identity. But you don't have to put that out there all day, every day. It doesn't have to be the centerpiece of that story every single time.
The first thing you do or whatever you make is not going to be perfect when it comes out. And no matter how many times you dot your I's and cross your T's, it's not going to be perfect. Hell, when it comes to podcasting, I remember our very first episode, it was crunchy as hell. And to this day, it still is not where I want it to be. But you just got to keep going. There's an audience out there for anything and everything. So you just have to make it and they will come, honestly. They will definitely come.
I do agree. I agree with all of that. So we could have, this is always great. Oh, well, I'm sorry. Did I just leave you out? I feel like that.
Oh, no, I said my piece.
Okay. I thought you were going to say something else. But, you know, I think we can just go on and on, but gotta be respectful of people's time. Let everybody know where we can find all of you.
So if you are interested in learning more about Mayke, you can go to We Are Mayke, M-A-Y-K-E, on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and we are at wearemayke.com as far as website is concerned. For me, I am at It's Ed Williams, ITS Ed Williams on Instagram and Twitter, and edwilliams.me for my website.
I am, you can look me up at ajuanmance.com. And there you can find links to my Twitter and my Instagram, and I think Facebook as well. My slowly growing web comic strip is called Check All That Apply, and it's at checkallthatapply.com.
You can find me on Twitter at PorterDAPizzazz. If you want to watch me stream, or over at Twitch, I'm at PorterPizzazz. You can follow me and Victor's podcast, MEGASheen, on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can look for our website coming soon, real soon.
Real soon. Once I remember this in the bio, which I need to do.
I've been asking you that forever.
I know. And I should be able to pull it from somewhere because I know it's out there. Y'all can find me on Twitter, Causing Problems, Wonderman5. Especially political season, I'm a very political person. Can't help it. That's Obama's fault for working on the campaign in California. You can also find me on Instagram where what's my name? His name is Victor. That's the name on Instagram. I am there. I'm exploring myself and putting pictures up and everything else. Yeah, I'm also on MEGASheen. You can find me there as well. And I wrote StrangeLore. I have finished the second version. It has been edited and it's ready to go. Just figuring out what we're going to do with that. And right now I am working on actually thinking of doing a novel, just a regular novel, dealing with a Black family of witches. So right now it is I don't have a real name for it, but right now it's something between the Book of Sorrows or between Sorrows and Hope. So it's somewhere in between those words. So we'll figure out what that is. But the outline is coming along quite well, which I'm very surprised, but I'm very happy to see that. But again, I thank my wonderful panel for being here tonight, and just giving all the wisdom, all the things out there for the public, and hopefully everyone enjoy this. And again, thank y'all for being here tonight. And that's it. So see y'all soon.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.